and thank you for joining us. My name is Brad Pearson. I work with the University of Toledo Sports Medicine Department. Today I have joining me Dr. Ruth Tetz, our sports psychologist with the department. With everything going on, we thought having her on today might be a good time to talk about some topics our student athletes are discussing. Ruth Ann, I really appreciate you joining us today.
I'm really glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be able to talk to the athletes. I really miss talking to them, and I'm sorry that I can't hear you talk back, but welcome. Hi.
Thanks again. So obviously this is a crazy time in pretty much anybody's history at this state that we're in. Obviously there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of things to worry about, but there's also a lot of positives in the scenario too. Don't want to focus too much on the negative here. We see some good things in the news lately, but during this time, obviously we're now somewhere between 3 weeks of social distancing, really staying apart from each other. Our normal activities are very different. A lot of free time on our schedules, if you will. What's your thoughts on having so much free time, techniques to potentially schedule around this? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? How should we handle all this free time?
Well, it can be either good or bad thing. It depends on how we use it and also how we think about it. So we can't control what happens to us, but we can control our response to it and what we tell ourselves. So I don't know if you all have read the blogs that I've written the last few weeks. The second blog, we were talking about scheduling, and that what I was really trying to get to there is kind of what we're talking about today in terms of, so how do we use our time? Because our time is something which we have a lot more of than we used to. But there's an old saying that came from even before I was born, that if you want to get something done, give it to the busy person. And the problem is that we don't have that many busy people. And so a lot of the stuff that normally we would do really easily, we're not getting accomplished. So what would be really, really helpful is for us to figure out how to structure our days so that we can feel at the when we go to bed at night that we accomplished something, that we can feel like the day was useful in helping us to get what we want in our lives.
So with this, the time that we have, this natural anxiety, this natural stress that comes with we in the world of athletics, if we're not busy, we start to get really, really anxious. Or we think that we didn't do anything. So this reflection, what's the best way to reflect at the end of the day? How would you go about tracking this, or what's a good model to try to repeat daily to try to make sure that we're focusing and decreasing that anxiety that we might be having?
Well, first of all, know that anxiety in and of itself is not a bad thing. If we didn't have anxiety and we wanted pizza and it was across the road, without anxiety, we would just eat pizza and we'd cross the road without looking both ways. So anxiety actually helps us to survive and to make good choices. So first of all, if you get anxious, don't let that be something that stops you in your tracks. It can also be something which can get you motivated to do things in a really healthy way. Again, if you want to look at the blog for activity schedule, let me quickly explain it, and we can edit all this out and have it be really short. But what you do for activity scheduling is either the night before or the morning before you even have breakfast, to figure out what is it that I want to accomplish today. And please understand that I know that there's some of you who are really very rigid. You want to fill in every single minute of the day. That is not activity scheduling. That is kind of silly. So what you do with activity scheduling is you figure out maybe 3 or 4 things that you really want to accomplish. And what you do is you simply write those down, and then you figure out what time do you want to start those. And so let's say that you're doing rehab, and it takes about 30 to 45 minutes a day to do rehab. And rehab is something that would be really helpful for you to do, but you don't really want to do it that much. But you really have to do it. So what you do is you schedule it. So let's say the night before you think to yourself, okay, afternoons, it's not so good in the afternoon. So maybe I better do it in the morning, because if I do it in the morning, then I don't have to keep thinking, oh, I got to do that still. So maybe, at 10:30, you decide at 10:30, you write down 10:30, you write down rehab, and you have that from 10:30 to 11:15. And so when you do it, then you have to make sure, and this is the most important part of activity scheduling, you have a big piece of paper that you write it on, and you have a pencil. And as soon as you do it, you check. And it's interesting. You might think that's really goofy, but the act of checking something off, it releases endorphins, and you get this sense of, Oh, so not only do you feel good that you accomplished it, but you also feel really, really good because you checked it off. And let's say that you 45-minute break time for that, and after about 12 minutes or 15 minutes, it was just something you just couldn't go on. And you could sit down and explain to me in 45 minutes why you couldn't go on. Here's the thing. If you started the thing on your activity schedule, you check it off anyway, even if you don't do the whole time. The most important thing that you're doing with activity scheduling is you're starting the activity. So let's say that you find that you're kind of anxious or you're kind of depressed and it's really hard for you to motivate to do anything. What you want to do is you want to start it. So let's say that you want to go for a 20-minute run. Well, you get your shoes on, you get your clothes on, you go out the door, you lock your door and start running. And let's say you get all the way to the street and it's just, that's not the day for it. So you turn around and you walk back. Guess what? You still check it off because the fact is you started. What people have found is that if they start an activity, they're most likely to finish it. So the reason that the rule is that you check if you started is because that makes it more likely when you have it on your activity schedule for the next day, you're more likely to finish it. But if even though you started it, you just feel like a failure. You're less likely to accomplish it the next day. So the rules are you write down the start time, you write down the activity, and you check it off if you start. Now understand that that activity scheduling that you're doing is not you wake up at 6:30 in the morning and you're busy until 7:30 at night and then you have fun. You make sure that maybe the 4 things that you do, you also have social gatherings. You also talk to your buddies. You also watch something on Netflix, or you also take a nap. I mean, so your activity scheduling is not, you are basically booking yourself the entire day. Activity scheduling is accomplishing important things during the day, but also having things during the day that are valuable for you.
Sure. No, great advice. You kind of touched on it there. So obviously, we're apart from each other. We don't get to see our normal interaction. We are obviously crossing paths with people in a normal setting of athletics hundreds to possibly 1,000 times a day on campus. So we do have this distancing from different states, different areas. How do we still feel like we're part of the team and create this connection during this time? What's your best advice in trying to stay connected and keeping those relationships?
Well, it's interesting because oftentimes when we are involved in person, you're just so used to seeing each other, you're not really aware that you're seeing each other. If that makes any sense at all. And so what this is forcing us to do, and I'm going to use an example that I was talking to one of my clinical people, and she was just starting to date someone, and she's older person. I mean, not old, but older, and she's dated people, for a few decades, that she's hoping to find the right one. Dating somebody, you have to make decisions pretty quickly. Well, in this world, how do you make decisions quickly? Because you're not, seeing each other really fast and then moving on. So what they're doing is they're FaceTiming every day, or they're talking from some other platform every day. They're taking some time just to sit there, just the two of them, because what else do you do? And they're talking. Will this relationship work? I have no idea, but it's slowing down the speed of the relationship so it becomes more meaningful. And so people, when they're talking to each other, they actually talk to each other, listening to each other, because they're so we're all so desperate for that connection. And so I think one of the really good things about this is that we start valuing each other, maybe not more, but better.
With this time, obviously, like I talked about, kind of the potential stresses that in our life, the anxiety that we talked about, good, bad. How do we keep this kind of focus in for the common goal and making sure we're staying on track personally and making our own mental well-being at a focus?
Well, let me define resiliency first, because maybe other people have different way of looking at it than I do. So before I talk about psychological resiliency, I want to talk about just like physical resiliency. When I was a little girl, I was in kindergarten. I was waiting for the bus, and the really mean second and third graders were going to lunch, and they were like really big. They must have been like, I don't know, 3 feet tall or something. And so they were walking along, and there was and here we are, we're just these little kids waiting to get on the bus. This really amazing slicker that is like all yellow from the top all the way to the bottom. I must have looked like a big lemon. And obviously a really good target. So I got shoved into a mud puddle. And so there I am in a mud puddle with the mud going up the coat and in the hat, and it was just everywhere. And if I'd had no physical, if I did wasn't a resilient person, I would still be laying there decades later. But what I did was I scrambled up really quickly because it was cold and it was wet and I wasn't happy. And I was just sitting there and I was just kind of dripping. And I thought to myself, well, that's a really terrible thing to have happened. And then all of a sudden, if I was smart back then, like hopefully I am now, I would think to myself, well, you couldn't control that something pushed you down, but how quickly did you get up? And that's what resiliency is. So psychological resiliency is not that you are always on top of your game. You're not always clean and pristine and looking great. It's when you fall down, when you become depressed or anxious or angry or upset, how quickly do you find your way back to a state of being that you most like? That sort of makes sense? And so literally what you're
Absolutely.
doing is, yeah, you're trying really desperately to not have to be perfect. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to find equilibrium a little bit more quickly. And there's some days that you find equilibrium pretty quickly and you hop right out of the mud. And then there's some days it might take you an hour or two. But those just are kind of ways for you figuring out where you're at that day. And if you're at a slower bounce back, then what you do is you take a little bit better care of yourself.
Also had an additional question from some student athletes that either they are in the healthcare field or they have family members that are working in the healthcare field. And right now, obviously, that's an area that has a high risk of infection, or we're hearing all this stuff about not having equipment. It's just there's a lot of uncertainty in that area. There's some pressures that they're feeling, with those family members or themselves. How should they be approaching this? How should they be, looking at this? What's a better way to handle those situations in your mind?
So somebody who's in a game or in a competition. You are a person, and so the people that you love make up who you are. The people that you're concerned about are part of your mental game. The idea here is that there's so many frontline people who are in law enforcement, people who are stocking shelves in the grocery store, people who are working in hospitals, whether they're nurses or doctors, or whether they're, food service people, or whether they're cleaning rooms. I mean, there are so many people who at this point are such heroes, but it causes such grave concern for family members. And so to be aware that, everybody who's doing this really is a hero, and to be able to honor them, and also to be able to honor the fact that you love somebody enough that you care about them. I wish that there was a way that we could always keep ourselves safe, but there isn't. I think that there are probably a lot fewer auto accidents, fatalities for people jumping cliffs. I mean, I think that there's so many ways that we're not dying now, but unfortunately, we've come up with new ways, and so life has never been about being safe. Life has always been about understanding the moment that we're living in and appreciating that and taking care of ourselves so that perhaps we have another moment. But this is also such a great opportunity for us to care about each other and to let each other know how much we care. And so if there's somebody in your family who's a hero, for you to be able to let them know that you know that. If you have a teammate who is concerned about somebody in their family, for you to let them know you care about them. This is such a great opportunity for us to be able to reach out and to be so amazingly human and loving.
And in addition to any of this, obviously, we're again in these weird situations. Is there anything you'd like to tell, the student athletes, in general, word of advice?
Hey, word of advice is it literally, you're not expected to be perfect. You're not expected to do it all right. If you need, if there's anything you'd like me to write about in the blog, do me a favor. I think that your athletic trainers are reaching out to you pretty regularly. Let them know, because they'll let me know. I really want this to work for you. I'm not doing this because I like writing, although I really do like writing. I'm doing this because I want to help you. So help me to help you, and take care of yourselves. I really look forward to seeing you again on campus.
For joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and we thank you. We can't say that enough.